Now let's have a little think about going about this from a different perspective. So let's say that my real world research interest, or perhaps my policy briefing focus, is on fresh water and the sustainability issues of fresh water, the existing governance, and I want to make proposals. And the context that I've chosen is my hometown, Crudgington, which is a small village in Shropshire, in England, in Britain. Now, when I go about this research, maybe there's a paper that I'm aware of, or that someone gives me that gives me a start, but also possibly not. So my first my first bit of research using a platform would be to say, well, has anyone written specifically on these issues in this context? And in a lot of cases, you might find that there's a whole wealth of literature that you can start to read to understand what's going on and to start to do your own analysis. In a lot of cases, however, the collective human knowledge hasn't quite got there, but that doesn't mean that we can't think about it, and you can't necessarily write about it or make suggestions. But the key technique here is to then think in a systematic way where you go as the sort of the next stage. So if you think about it as a dartboard or a bullseye, the thing you're interested in is in the middle. There might be a very tiny amount of information on that. So then the question is, well, where do I go for the next layer? How do I try to advance my research? And I might think, well, because Crudgington is in England, what I'll now do is I'll search for a bigger geographical context. So let's look in England, and maybe there's nothing on Crudgington, but I can find research and analysis that's been done in this different context. And because Crudgington is within England, I can develop some reasons why I think this might be transferable. So that's a sort of rigorous and systematically developed approach to research. If, of course, I think, is Crudgington sufficiently similar to England to maybe transfer ideas and to make connections here? And the answer is no, then you've got to sort of rethink your strategy. But if I have good reason to do this, then I can go with that. And at the same time, I also might think, well, actually, would it be justifiable to say, well, maybe I've got a bit on England, but not too much, and I want some more? Can I look at France as another different context to think about freshwater governance, and maybe therefore understand what might be going on in this small village in Shropshire, with potential to be making suggestions? So, can experience in France and England in that context, with certain governance initiatives that have worked out well, can we transfer that across to Crudgington? And so this is, again, the same process I was talking about previously. Now, as we're following those citations, though, maybe one of the papers about freshwater governance in France references this article by whoever. Look up this article, and this article is actually about the economics of biscuit buying in Afghanistan. Now, this is obviously a very different subject in a very different context. So it might be most likely that the reason this paper is cited is because it uses some kind of sort of abstract, conceptual or theoretical connection, even though the topic and the geographical focus is very different. So there is a possibility that there is important knowledge in this paper that I can transfer to the context of my interest. But there's also many reasons why actually this may not be a particularly useful article to read, given my limited time and resources. So it's really important, again, to make those critical decisions when you're following citations. Does it look sufficiently relevant? Does it look sufficiently transferable? Could I justify drawing knowledge from here? Because, of course, there's always an opportunity cost. I could spend 2 or 3 hours reading this paper, or actually I could say, well, let's look about freshwater governance in other countries. So the geographical focus is wider, but at least it's talking about the subject that interests me. And there might be more reasons why that is a more justifiable thing to transfer over across as part of my research and my interest in freshwater governance in Crudgington. So this is something that we want to look for. And we may also say, well, in order to generate innovation, let's not just look at what's been done in the context of freshwater governance. What do we know about environmental governance more generally? Could we start to transfer things across? So let's say the only method we find of people addressing freshwater issues is through the use of laws and command and control governance. We say, well, actually, let's say in the context of climate change, there's been successful examples of the state using certain incentives and tax regimes to get people to change their behaviour. So what if we were to apply this to freshwater governance? And again, that's where you get your evidence-based innovation from, moving knowledge and experience from one context where you have reason to believe it might have worked and could work somewhere else, and shifting it across. That's what we're looking for in terms of innovation and creativity. And therefore, when you look at your list of references, or you look at the themes that you've written about through a policy brief, or through an essay or through your dissertation, you should be able to sort of trace some fairly logical lines, and you can see the connections between one subject focus and another. And if you can see that, and if you have good reasons why you've transferred things across, that's good, scientifically informed, systematic, rigorous academic thinking research. That is what you want. If you look at it and you're tracing this line, and suddenly you hit this random entry in your bibliography, biscuit buying in Afghanistan, you have to ask yourself the question, is that really the right thing to be citing? And if you have a good reason, probably useful to be transparent about that to the reader, but you keep it in. If alternatively you think, well, actually, there's loads of literature about something much more relevant and therefore more justifiably transferable, let's take that out and let's rethink my ideas. So that goes. It might sit there on the edge with some kind of abstract theoretical connection, and that might produce fantastic innovation. You bring in a really different idea from a very different context, but where you have sufficient reason to do that, that can be a particularly innovative thing to do. But the most important point is that you're thinking about this actively and critically, not just getting together a bunch of articles which really you have no particular reason for having chosen over other ones that may or may not exist. That's the key point here.